OK, the unnamed BBC presenter continues to dominate the news, and this morning they're facing a trio of further allegations. The Sun newspaper reporting the host broke lockdown rules to meet a 23-year-old at a time when it was illegal to mix with people outside of your own household.
And The Sun is also carrying claims that the suspended presenter sent messages to a 17-year-old that included heart emojis and kisses, described as creepy.
Well, it follows new allegations from the BBC that the unnamed host sent abusive messages to a young person on a dating app after they hinted they would name him. We're going to speak to David Keighley. David is a former BBC News producer. Good morning to you, sir. OK?
Good morning to you both.
Good, yeah. David, the new revelations overnight, more people involved in this, more message, the plot thickens.
Indeed it does, yes, and one wonders where this is going to end. But I think the key thing here is that we need to know more about what actually happened, and we need to know what the police are going to do. We need to know what the intentions of the presenter are, as Jeremy Vine has, as you say in your headlines, has called for whoever it is to come clean and say what exactly happened.
And, you know, how sustainable is this hiatus that has been imposed by the police, asking the BBC to pause their investigation while they do exactly as you say and try to collect the facts in what they're describing as an assessment, not an investigation?
I don't think it is sustainable for very long at all, because, of course, we're living in an age where information does get out, irrespective of what people feel about or what the rules are about issues such as privacy. This is engulfing the BBC in a massive way now, in a way that's damaging the reputation of presenters who are not in the frame, as it were. Somehow the BBC has got to get its act together in a way that it doesn't seem to be doing yet. It took nearly 6 weeks for them to start this investigation. They were aware of this back in May. They didn't do anything. Whatever they were doing was in the BBC's own pace, and it just shows that their complaints procedure, I think, is not good enough on many levels. And I think Tim Davie, the Director General, hasn't, in his statement yesterday, hasn't really fully grasped yet the full importance of this. Yeah.
There were things there, David. I mean, when you think back to your time as a producer and the people you've looked after in that time and been responsible for and who've worked under you, and Davie saying yesterday, well, of course, when an allegation comes in about a presenter, you don't immediately go to the presenter and say, there's been this allegation about you. Now, if this was me, if this came in about me, I would be furious if I did not know that somebody was making an allegation about me. You would want to know either to nip it in the bud straight away or to do something about it. But for Davie to say, well, this is sort of natural process, that we don't inform the presenters straight away. What do you think about that?
As I flagged earlier, I think it's just not good enough in the circumstances. It's not giving the urgency of what the modern media. It's not recognising the urgency and the speed with which the modern media works. Of course, and I said this earlier, but of course, this has got to be investigated properly. We can't have kangaroo courts and so on. But at the same time, the BBC needs to see that what's happening here is reputational damage at a very fundamental level. And they have, of course, got a track record of not being quick enough to investigate things. The Jimmy Savile affair, the Cliff Richard, the Martin Bashir with the Princess Di interview, all those showed that the BBC proceeds at its own pace, in its own way, because it's judge and jury in its own complaints process. And it's blinded by the fact that because it is stuck in due process, that things are happening out there in the real world to real people, and this has got to be properly addressed.
Well, in the real world, we have Jeremy Vine saying that this presenter should identify himself, he should come forward. What's your view on that?
Obviously, an individual has got to make his own decisions, but at the same time, this has now reached such levels that I think the presenter involved has got to look very carefully at what's happening to other people, as well as to him or whoever it is, and make a judgment accordingly.
It's interesting, though, you talk about the BBC's track record. We mustn't forget Paul Gambaccini and, as you mentioned, Cliff Richard. And I suppose the BBC could argue, when we heard yesterday from the alleged victim, who was actually quashing the Sun's original story that anything illegal had happened, it does make you think, hang on, we've got to take time, make sure the facts are established, and it kind of adds credence to that. But obviously these new allegations then have come to light as the story seems to take on a nature of its own. Possibly the only law breaking so far as we can see it could be this lockdown breaking of the rules.
Yeah, of course. And we mustn't jump to conclusions. Because there are allegations, it doesn't mean they're true. But at the same time, what appears to be happening with the numbers of people coming forward now is that there does appear to be more substance to this than warrants just let's wait and see. And I recognise fully that the accusations are wrong against the wrong people, obviously are very damaging. And that was tested very much in the Cliff Richard affair about 5-6 years back. But it is now out of control, and something needs doing which recognises that.
Just lastly, Ofcom have said the board of BBC trusts needs to take full responsibility for this. What does that look like, do you think?
Full responsibility means acting now very quickly indeed, making this an absolute priority. It means talking to everyone involved. And of course, you can't force anybody to take a particular stance, but it's got to be the number one priority in the BBC's agenda at the moment.
Whatever happens, David, is this presenter's career over, do you think?
Very hard to say, because it depends ultimately on whether what's being alleged is true. And as we all know, we don't know whether it is true or not yet. So that has to be the case. But absolutely, in the frame here is the BBC's complaints procedure, which is not good enough, and they need to recognise that something. They need to take steps now which recognise the full urgency of this situation.
David Keighley, really appreciate your take on things.